Okay, so I'm going to get started so we can be somewhat on time. So my name is Jessie Allen. I'm a career counselor in Career Services, and I'm the career counselor who's assigned to the College of Education and Professional Studies. And so a lot of what I do is prepping students to get ready for the recruiting seasons for their different majors. And right now, it is the recruiting season for education students. We've got the Ed Fair coming up on February 28th. And so this workshop is to help prepare you so that you can be successful interviewing. And you may have had an interview already because the season has really begun already. School districts are recruiting people earlier and earlier because there is that teacher shortage. But we've got about 65 school districts coming on February 28th, and they will be having like mini interviews basically at the Ed Fair. And we want to make sure that students feel like they're prepared. Okay, so basically what we recommend in Career Services is that you prepare for interviews more than you probably would imagine, because we know that preparation increases confidence and confidence increases performance. So just like if you were playing in a big sports tournament or something like that, you wouldn't just go in cold without any preparation, right? You would prepare ahead of time and hone your skills so that you can give a good performance and you're not so nervous that you mess things up. So one of the biggest pieces of preparation is really doing your research. So what kind of interview format are you going to be having? So are you going to have a one-on-one interview? Is it going to be a Skype interview? Is it going to be over the phone? Is it going to be a panel interview? So if you can find out that information, you're going to be better prepared, because doing a phone interview is quite different from doing an in-person interview, since they can't see your facial expressions, right? So you'll prepare differently depending on what the interview format is. Also, another piece is understanding the school. You really want to go into that interview having done your research on the school district, and then more specifically that school. Scouring their website, finding out any insider information that you can. All of that's going to be good ammunition for not only the interview, but also your cover letter too. So when you're applying. The job description, if you can get your hands on a job description, that is going to be your best friend really during the interview, because often they're asking questions that try to see if you have read the job description thoroughly and if you actually understand what the job is about. It also will give you an idea of what direction to take things when you are talking about things like your strengths or different experiences that you have had. Another thing you want to make sure that you've researched is the logistics. So do you know what building you're going to have the interview in? Do you know the room number? Have you looked at the weather conditions? Like if you're having an interview on the west side and we've had the weather that we've been having, you may want to go over the night before and actually stay in a hotel or stay with a friend so that you can get there on time and not have the pass close on you. You may want to go and do a test run, like go actually drive around the area, make sure you know how to get there, make sure that you know the traffic patterns and all of that so that you don't end up late to your interview. So that brings up, how early should you arrive to an interview? We recommend 15 minutes. Because any sooner than that, you may be seen as a little bit strange if you're just sitting there lurking in the office for a half an hour to 40 minutes before your interview. But if you are actually on time, so say your interview is at 2 p.m. and you show up at 2 p.m., some people actually consider that to be late already. So we recommend about 15 minutes is a good window. And then you really want to have mapped out your answers to some of the common interview questions beforehand, because when you're nervous, when you're actually in the situation, sometimes we say things that we shouldn't say. We step in some what I call landmines if we haven't prepared ahead of time. So it's really important that you give some of those answers some thought ahead of time. And that's part of what we're going to be doing today, is we're going to be trying to give those answers some thought and map out some things that we might say in an actual interview. All right, so I have this here in my in-person workshops, I have people actually stand up, shake hands, just because I want to remind people that handshakes really give an impression. That's one of your first impressions that you're giving off. And if you've ever had a bad handshake, which we all have, that they can be strange, right? So you don't want to be that limp noodle, or you don't want to be that person that's going in with the construction worker grip, because that's going to give off a strange impression. So continuing on with impressions, we've got some do's and don'ts here. You really want to make sure that you're dressing appropriately for the interview or the ed fair. And oftentimes I'll hear students say things like, you should just dress for the industry. Every industry is different, so you want to dress for the industry, so you should wear what you'd be wearing at work, which we tend to disagree with that in career services, and we say that you should go above what you would wear on a typical day. So a typical day, you may be wearing, a cardigan or a sweater of some sort, slacks. But when you have an interview, you actually want to go above that, because you'd rather have them say, oh my gosh, this person really took this interview seriously, than for them to think that you didn't take it seriously enough. So you always want to err on the side of conservative, and conservative with colors that you choose, conservative with jewelry or showing tattoos. You want to cover those up. You don't want to be showing a lot of skin. You want to look polished, so ironing the clothes, making sure your hair looks polished, all of that, because that's your chance to make a good first impression. So you can also see here from this slide, this one is about clothing, but it's also about body language. So body language is also an important thing to watch when you are in an interview. You can see the person on the right is, slouching, just looking like laid back, like they don't care. You don't want to be like that. You want to show that you're attentive, that you've put a lot of thought and time into it, that you do care what the principal thinks or the panel thinks of you. Body language can say a lot, so you don't want to be fidgeting. You don't want to be, tapping on something, or be shifty, or not making eye contact. All of those things can be red flags for an employer. So watching the body language is important. So here's some more do's and don'ts for how to dress. I'm guessing you guys will all do a good job and come dressed to impress. But just some reminders, make sure your clothing fits you, and things are ironed and you're looking polished. Okay, so I'm just going to give you guys a minute to ask any questions that you might have at this point. And if you don't have any questions, then I'll just move into interview questions. By the way, to ask a question, you have to unmute your microphone in the bottom left-hand corner. You could also use the chat box, but I admit that I'm new to this technology, so I'm not really vigilant about the text box. So I think I'd prefer if you just ask the question via unmuting your microphone. Okay, so I don't hear any questions, so I will go ahead and move on. Okay, so let's talk about the interview questions that you should, without a doubt, be ready to answer. So the first and foremost is the tell me about yourself. So you'll always get some version of this in an interview. It could be even just a mini interview at a career fair. Sometimes you don't even know that they're interviewing you, but that's kind of their first step in the screening process, is just like a little mini interview. And you want to be able to answer this question because it's probably the first thing they're going to say to you. And it's very vague. And so often people, will be like, what, what do I say? Gosh. And so this meme kind of made me laugh when I saw it, because this is what I used to think before I knew how to answer this question. I always thought, oh my gosh, there's so many things I could say. Like, you don't want to get in trouble by saying something that's too personal, right? You want to keep it professional. So that's how we recommend that you answer this question. So I do have a little formula for you guys that I'll show you in just a second, but make sure that you're not saying anything about your age, because age discrimination is real. And we don't want them thinking that you're too young and that you may not be able to handle the responsibility, because like I say, age discrimination is real. If you're, an older person, then they could be thinking that you're not going to be around that long. You may be closer to retirement, or you may not have the energy levels to be able to do the job. And so we just get in the habit of, from day one, interviewing 101, you don't need to say your age. And that's actually an illegal question for most workplaces. They're not allowed to ask you your age unless it somehow relates to the job. And in most cases, it doesn't. Also, don't mention anything about your relationship status. I know that it's tempting for a lot of people to say, well, I'm from this town and I just moved here with my fiance, or, things like that, or I've got kids, or, that sort of thing. So again, you're trying to stay away from the personal stuff and go in the direction of the professional stuff. So relationship status is just none of their business. Parental status, if you have a lot of kids, for instance, that could make it seem like you'll be too busy. You'll be having a lot of sick days, or you'll be having to go home and take care of sick kids, or, you just don't want to give them any reason to judge you. So you don't need to mention that. But this is a formula that I think can be a pretty good one. I think having formulas when you're answering interview questions is very helpful, because you get nervous. You can't help but get nervous. It's something that's important to you. You really want the job. And so you end up sometimes rambling or not knowing when to stop, or sometimes you don't say enough. Some people get really nervous and then they don't say enough because they just want to get it over with. So if you have some formulas for your interview answers, that can really keep you on track and make sure that you're hitting all the points that you want to. So this one is called present, past, future. And so you would say something along the lines of, currently, so that would be present. Currently, I am a senior graduating with my degree in. So you want to make sure to mention your degree. You want to mention, majors, minors, specializations. You could mention endorsements at this point. You want to say when you're graduating. So that's kind of like your current scenario. You could mention a job that you have, if you have a job that is, somewhat related to what, you're trying to do. If it's not really related, then you'd want to talk about transferable skills here. So transferable skills are the skills that you take with you everywhere that you go that are applicable to every job that you do. So something like customer service, believe it or not, is a transferable skill. So maybe you have a current job where you work in customer service, and so you could mention that briefly. You don't want to go into too much detail about it just because that job is not relevant to the job that you're trying to get, but you can still tell them what you're doing, tell them or highlight the transferable skills. Past would be maybe like where you did your student teaching or some past jobs that you've had. And then a future would be why you're interested in this position or why you're interested in working for this school or school district. So that's a nice little formula. Expect to spend about 2 minutes answering each question. So most people are short in their answers and they don't give the interviewers enough information to actually feel like they got to know the person they're interviewing. And you want them to feel like they've gotten to know you, otherwise they won't feel comfortable hiring you, honestly. So you want to make sure you're giving them enough info. This answer gives them quite a bit of information, because like the future piece where you tell them why you're interested in working for their school, they would probably ask you that regardless. They want to know that. And basically that answer should be based on the research that you've done on their school. So you want to be able to say the good things that you have discovered about their school. What makes you want to work there? Why are they better than other schools? That makes sense. So I would really recommend writing this out ahead of time before you have any interviews, before you go to the ed fair. If you have, hopefully you guys are taking notes right now, because you're going to want to go back and craft some of these. Okay, so I don't think we'll do the practice in pairs because we don't have enough people, I don't think, or an even number of people. So I'm going to skip through this. So the next one, the next recommendation that I have is from Socrates here, which is know thyself. If you don't know yourself and what you have to offer, it's very hard to do a good job at interviewing. So you really want to start to take inventory of some things. And the biggest one is going to be your strengths and weaknesses. And so as you see in this image here, I've got all these smiley faces outweighing the negative, the sad face. So this is to represent that we recommend giving more strengths than weaknesses always. They may ask you this question just straight up, what are some of your strengths and weaknesses? Or it could be more embedded in another question. So sometimes I've heard things like, can you tell us what some of your strengths of instruction are? Or what is your, where do you have room for improvement in your instruction? And so that would be asking you about a weakness. It could be, in one question, or it could be in a couple different questions, but you want to take inventory of this ahead of time, because this is really going to get you through the interview. If they don't ask you any questions about strengths, you still want to get those strengths in somehow during the course of the interview. It's your job to get those strengths in. You want the employer to know what your strengths are. You don't necessarily want them to know what your weaknesses are, but you still better be ready to handle that question in case it comes up. And so the way that we recommend handling that is to talk about the strengths that are relevant to the job. That's why it's very helpful if you have that job description, so you can look through it and think about the things that they're looking for that you also have. If you don't have a job description, that's okay, but I would still recommend looking at lots of different job descriptions for similar positions to what you're hoping to get, so that you can get an idea of what are the general themes of strengths that they're looking for kind of across the board. And you can talk about the ones that you have. So you don't want to just talk about all the strengths that they're looking for if you truly don't have them. You want to be honest and just pick the ones that you do have. But as much as possible, you want to keep those strengths relevant to the type of work that you would be doing. And like I said before, even if they don't ask you about strengths specifically, you still want to sprinkle those in throughout the interview. And so what I would do ahead of time is an exercise like this. I would, if it were me getting ready for an interview, I would map out at least 3 strengths and 1 weakness beforehand. But I would probably do more than that even. I would probably list out 5 of my strengths and maybe 2 to 3 of my weaknesses, just to have in my back pocket in case they ask for more, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes they'll say, do you have any others you'd like to talk about? And then, you want to know what you're going to say ahead of time so that you don't fall into any traps. So what I usually tell people to do is list the strength, do this ahead of time on paper, list the strength, name it, and then give an example of you demonstrating it. So you want to go into your past and find a time when you've demonstrated that strength. So by giving an example for each of your strengths, you are creating a vision for the employer. And now they're picturing you in their mind using those strengths in their workplace. And so that gets them more excited about you. It makes them feel like what you have said is true. Often people will rattle off strengths and they don't give any examples, and they just don't even feel true. It's like anybody can rattle off a bunch of strengths, but if you can give an example of you demonstrating it, it becomes much more real for the employer. With weaknesses, however, you do not want to make them envision you using that weakness. So you actually don't really want to give much of a story for that. You want to name the weakness, and then you want to give your solution to the weakness. So you want to be honest, give them a true weakness. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to frame it as a strength. Be real. Do not pick a weakness that is debilitating to that job, though. That's key. You don't want to pick something that makes you now a horrible candidate for the position. So think about this ahead of time. Pick something that's a little bit more neutral, and then just give your solution to it. So you want to spend more time talking about the solution than the weakness. But like I say, pick something more neutral, and you're just showing maturity, basically. You're showing them like, yes, we all have weaknesses. I understand this weakness of mine, but I also understand how I could combat it. So maybe you have had trouble with, I'm thinking like maybe planning out your lessons, far enough in advance. And so you get yourself a special kind of calendar or planner, or you set some reminders for yourself, so then you just start focusing on those solutions that you have to help yourself not be bogged down by this weakness. Okay, so like I was saying before, you've got some things that you want to draw from. So some people don't have a lot of work experience, so maybe you would be pulling from volunteer work or student teaching, or maybe even a class experience, so from your education. But it is definitely better to pull from past jobs if you can. I will say that. But mapping this out ahead of time, this will give you time to really think. And then your whole interview should really be sprinkled with things like this. For example, when, or for instance, when. So you always want to tie your examples or your strengths to experiences. So you're always telling little stories throughout the interview. That's what makes for a good interview, is if you have real stories to tell. Like I say, again, you have about 2 minutes to answer each question. So use that time. Okay, does anybody have any questions about strengths or weaknesses? Because sometimes this can be tricky, and people want to know, would this be a good weakness to talk about, or? Nobody? Okay, so I will move along. Okay, so this, tell me about a time when. Anytime you hear this, and it could be in a little bit of a different format, but you've got to start to learn to recognize this when you hear an interviewer say, tell me about a time when, or can you give us an example of a time when? So what this is doing is this is prompting you with a behavioral question. So behavioral questions are very, very common. You're going to get lots of these. And these questions are designed to try to predict your future behavior. So what they're doing is they're saying, by trying to figure out what this person has done in the past, I'm going to try to predict what they might do in the future. So this is just, basic psychology here. And when you hear this prompt, that means that it is story time. So this is when you really have to have some good, meaningful stories to be able to tell. So this is an acronym. So I've got another kind of formula for you to be able to use, which is S.O.A.R, like a bird, that kind of soar. You'll also hear STAR, maybe. STAR is very similar to this, but I like SOAR better. So S stands for situation. So you would be telling them, where were you? What kind of job were you doing? What was the setting? O stands for obstacle. And the obstacle would be what was challenging about this scenario. A is for action, but the action that you did, not somebody else. So you always want to make sure to be telling what you did at a certain point, because they're trying to interview you, they're trying to hire you. And then the last part is results. R is for results. How did it turn out? And you want to pick stories that have good endings, happy endings, where there's some kind of either lesson or things turned out good in the end. So basically, these stories are all designed to make you look good. So basically, because of you in a challenging situation, things turned out good. So it's a way to display your skills to the employer. And if you hit all of these points, you're going to tell a gratifying story. Whereas if you miss something here, they're going to wonder, what was the point of that story, possibly? So a lot of times people will forget to say what they specifically did. So the action part, they forget, and they say what other people in the scenario did. So they'll say, oh, and then my supervisor did this, or my team did this, they say we a lot, and they never say I. So you really need to get down to the part that you specifically did. So that action piece is crucial. Also the results. A lot of times people forget to say the results. And then the employers are left with this weird story like, okay, and the point of that was, they don't know how it turned out. So a couple examples of these that you're probably going to get is, tell me about a time you worked with a difficult student. So it may not be that vague, in terms of worked with a difficult student, it might be, tell me about a time you worked with a student who had behavioral issues, or tell me about a time you worked with an ELL student who blah, 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 you know. So they could be a little bit more specific than this, but I would definitely, you know, kind of take inventory, see if you can come up with a couple of stories about some different scenarios where you worked with a student that was difficult, and then you want to go back to that S.O.A.R. So you want to write it out. Where were you? What were you doing? What was difficult about it? Why was that student challenging? What did you do to try to help make things better? And how did it turn out good? Another one that you should be ready to answer. You may or may not get it, but I've seen this one a lot with administrators, and they say a lot of them are asking this. So tell me about a time you differentiated instruction. So again, you're going to go back to S.O.A.R. Where were you? Why did you need to do it? What did you specifically do to differentiate the instruction? You want to get very specific here, because this is going to show your knowledge. This is the stuff your industry is made of, right? And then how did it turn out good in the end? So some people don't have an example of this yet because they haven't been in the classroom yet. Maybe you haven't done your student teaching yet. So you may have an example of a lesson that you did in one of your classes where you differentiated instruction. That would be okay, although it would be better to have a scenario from a situation where you were in charge of a classroom. But as soon as you do your student teaching, I'm sure you'll have plenty of these examples. Okay, so there's a huge gamut of things that you could possibly be asked in the interview. I'm going to refer you guys to a website where you can find lots of different questions like that. And so you can look at those, and some of the website has some actual answers in them as well, where people from forums chime in and say, you know, what kinds of answers that they would like to hear in some of those questions. I know that depending on whether you're elementary ed or whether you are going to be teaching, you know, high school or middle school, the questions are going to be different. Depending on your endorsements, they're going to be a little bit different, or the type of role that you're interviewing for. If it's like literacy, they're going to no doubt ask you some questions about, you know, assessing reading levels, plans for literacy in your class, things like that. So be prepared for the more specific ones. And like I say, I'm going to give you a website for that. But I do want to go over here. This slide is questions for the interviewer. So a lot of people don't take this part as seriously as they should, and they just at the end, they feel like they don't want to take up too much of the employer's time, and so the employer says, do you have any questions for me? And they say, no, I'm good. And what that does actually is that makes you look unprepared. So you don't want to give that impression, so you actually do want to come with some questions. And you know, even if it's at the ed fair, you know, and you maybe weren't even expecting to be interviewed by someone from a particular district, you can still ask some general questions that are good questions. So I'm going to go over a few things that I think are good. You should have at least three questions for them, one of which should be, what's the next step in the process, or when should I expect to hear back from you? That's always the last question that you should ask. Or it could be, what's your timeline for hiring someone, something like that. Other questions that are good are questions that are positive. So one that I like that's very general, so like even if you're, like I say, caught off guard at a career fair or something, and they ask you, or they want to interview you and you don't really know a lot about their district, you could still ask something like, what do you enjoy most about working for your school district? Or what do other teachers seem to enjoy most about working for this particular school? So then it's positive, and it gets the interviewer talking. There is some research to show, psychological research that shows that if you can get the interviewer talking more at the end of the interview or during the interview, and you're getting them talking about positive things, and they perceive to have liked you more. So if you can get them talking, laughing, smiling, that's a really good thing. If it's a district that you know you want to work for, then you should be doing your due diligence and be researching them as much as possible. And in that scenario, you would have questions based on the research that you've done on the school. So you could have some more pointed questions about specific things based on your research. You never want to ask questions that show that you haven't done your research. So sometimes people will ask questions thinking it's a good question, but really it's a bad question because it shows, it's just revealed to them that you didn't even read their website, right? So, or that you don't understand the job, that you didn't even read the job description. So those are the types of questions I would say stay away from. Do your research first and then ask questions. 3 to 5 questions I would say are considered good. Don't ask anything about pay, vacation, even work hours sometimes can be a no-no because it makes you look like you don't want to have to work that much. So you don't want to ask anything that makes you look, sound, greedy or lazy. If it's about pay, what you want to do is you want to find out what the pay range is before you apply or before you interview or after you've interviewed and they offer you a position. Then that's when you can start the negotiation. So, you want to research what our pay ranges for that particular area and understand where you come into that, like entry level, or, if you have a little bit of experience already, maybe you've been subbing for a long time, then maybe you could ask for a little bit more, but that should not happen in the interview. That's considered bad interview etiquette. Let's see, any other questions that I can think of that are good? You can ask something like, aside from the job description, what qualities make for a successful teacher at the school? You don't want to just ask that question without saying aside from the job description, though, because then it makes it sound like you didn't read the job description, because they'd be like, well, we laid it out in the job description. So you want to say aside from the job description, what other qualities make for a great teacher? Or what qualities make for a successful first-year teacher? Or what kinds of things would you like to see accomplished in the first year while I'm on the job if I were to get the position? So things like that have positive answers are the best. You don't want to ask them about anything that could have a negative answer, because that'll just bring the whole mood of the interview down and then you leave on a weird note. So you want to elevate the mood. Okay, any questions about that? Questions for the interviewers or employers? No? Okay. So I will give you guys my email at the end too. So if you have any questions, you can always email me. Okay, so just to clarify, it is okay in the interview to ask for a minute to think about a question, because that is much better than not taking your time and then answering it wrong or saying something that you just didn't think about long enough. I did a mock interview today with a student and she took quite a while to answer one of my questions, but she had a really good answer. And so I commended her for that. Like, I'm glad that you took your time because you ended up having a really good answer. And I don't think you would have done that if you would have rushed your answer. So it's also okay to ask them to repeat a question. Sometimes they may use a term that you're not familiar with, or sometimes just the way that the person's talking, it wasn't very clear, or sometimes the way the questions are worded are just odd. You haven't heard something like that before, or it's a 3-4 part question even, and you want to make sure that you're understanding what all they're asking. So it is perfectly okay to ask them to repeat a question. You want to make sure that you've answered all parts of their question. So if it is a 2 or 3, 4 part question, you can clarify. I think it's really smart to do that, to say at the end, because sometimes you go off on a tangent, and you come back and you're like, did I answer all of that for you? And sometimes they'll say, actually, no, could you talk a little bit more about this particular piece? And then it becomes a conversation. That's what you want. You want the interview to become a conversation. It's a two-way street. Then you also want to ask for clarification on a question if you don't get it. You do want to brush up on your acronyms and your industry-specific terminology. beforehand. I mean, hopefully you guys are all fresh with that anyways. But one piece of feedback we got from an employer was actually that they had some issues when they interviewed some Central students a couple of years back, and they ended up hiring students from other schools, mainly the University of Washington, because they said that the Central students that they interviewed were not familiar with the some of the acronyms that they used. So you want to make sure that you brushed up on all of that. But if you don't know, it's better to ask. Maybe you just haven't heard it used in an acronym before, and so it'd be better if they said all of the words instead of the acronym. But it's better, like I say, better that you clarify and you answer it correctly and you understand what they're getting at than for you to not and have it be a very strange answer that you give. So if you go to the website Road to Teaching, there you can find a whole bunch of interview questions that are typical for administrators to ask when they're trying to screen their candidates. And some of them actually have answers too. So you can actually go in there and see what are considered to be good answers for some of these questions. We also have this employer panel coming up that I'm really excited about. So this is the day of the Ed Fair, and that's February 28th, and it's from 10 to 11. The Ed Fair is from noon to 3, so it's before the fair. And we've got Quincy coming, we've got Kennewick, Bethel, and Lake Washington school districts. And we've got superintendents and directors of human resources and things like that. They're going to come and they're going to just talk to us about the kinds of questions that they like to ask. They're also going to tell us like some of their pet peeves. What do they think are good questions? What do successful interviews look like? Who are the people that they end up hiring? Who are the people that they don't end up hiring, and why? And so you get to hear it straight from the employer's mouth. So hopefully you guys will be able to attend that. It's going to be in the C.W.U. Theater, which is a big room. So it would be nice to have some students there and not have it be, not feel empty, because that room can really feel empty pretty easily, even when there's quite a few people. So there's that coming up. In terms of what to bring to the interview, if you have an interview where they invite you to a school district, you want to bring at least 5 copies of your resume. And if you can put that on resume paper, even better. That'll make you look more professional. And basically what you do in that scenario is you have like a folder that you carry, or a briefcase or a pad folio. And when you come in, you say, I did bring some extra copies today if anybody needs a copy of my resume. So you're not forcing them to take it because they've already seen it. Otherwise they wouldn't be interviewing you. But what you're doing it is like a way to score brownie points, basically. Like it's an etiquette thing. So if somebody came to the interview and they didn't have time to print off a copy for themselves, then you would be there providing it for them. So you're just offering. And then you do want to bring a notebook and a writing utensil, and that is going to be to write down the names of the interviewers. So you guys are going to have a panel interview at some point. You're going to have, a few different people in on your interview at some point, and you want to be able to know all their names because you want to be able to send a thank you card after the interview. So it could be a thank you email, or it could be a handwritten card, either way, but you want to get it to them quickly, because if they are trying to make a decision about a candidate, maybe they've got 2 people that they really like and you're one of them, if you send a thank you card, that can really tip the scales in your favor. And so what you want to do is write down their names and then later go back to the website, make sure you're spelling their names correctly, and then address it to all the people that were in on the interview. And then I have the what not to bring column over here. So you don't need to bring a cover letter. They're not going to have time to read that in the interview anyways. Plus they've already read it. Don't bring backpacks. Nothing says backpack more, or student more than a backpack. I wouldn't even bring my phone if I were you. I would actually leave it in the car, because sometimes, you think you've turned it off, but you didn't turn off all of the notifications you're getting, or you've got it vibrating, or, it's making noises during the interview, and that can be very distracting and seem unprofessional. So those are just some very, very basic things. There's definitely more do's and don'ts than that, but if you guys have any questions, just email me, or you can ask me now. Okay, so we're just going to briefly talk about the letters of intent, just so you guys are aware that those are going to be happening. So you may interview with a couple different districts. It could be at a open house or the career fair, or they invite you, to their school. And what can happen is they may offer you a letter of intent. So just an FYI that a letter of intent converts to a contract. So you want to be very careful about signing these things. So basically what you would be doing, a letter of intent is them saying that they're intending on hiring you for the next school year. If you sign it, then you're saying, yes, I will only work for your school. So you can't sign more than one of these. So you really want to give careful consideration, and what can really help you make a well-informed decision is making sure that you're doing your research ahead of time. So if you have several letters of intent at once, don't sign them. Take a little bit of time. Let them know that you're going to take a little bit of time, because you don't want to promise something that you can't follow through on. And then you want to do as much research as you can on those districts. Ideally, you would have researched them ahead of time. But if you haven't, then you want to do that as soon as possible. And these are some ways that you can find out more about the district. So you could do an informational interview with someone who works there. You could reach out to another teacher there and ask if you can ask some questions about their job in the school. You can do a job shadow. These are things that ideally you would be doing ahead of time, not after the interview, because that could look strange. Ideally most of these would be done ahead of time, but these are great ways to do your research and figure out if it would be a district that you would be interested in working for. It's good to get input from the other people that work there. There's also, things you can find out from their website and social media. There's Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a website where they do employee reviews of companies and schools and things like that. So you could go on there and see like what other people that have worked there say about working there and what kind of reviews they give it. But yeah, the point is you don't want to accept multiple letters. This is like an engagement ring. You would be committing to work for that district, and it would be something that could be held up in court as a contract of you signing a contract, although most districts would not pursue that in court. It's just something that you want to be aware of and want to take seriously. So this is my information here. If you guys wanted to get a hold of me for any reason, so Jessie, JESSEY.ALLEN@CWU.edu. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see the info for Career Services. And this is our website, cwu.edu/career. You can find resume templates, cover letter templates, interviewing tips, our info for if you wanted to make an appointment. We do mock interviews all the time, so we practice interviews with people one-on-one if you wanted to come in and do a mock interview at any point. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen here. So you guys can see me. Does anybody have any questions? I see some stuff in the chat now that I can actually see the chat. Okay. I couldn't see it from my view before. Okay, so I have a question that says, what about coaching as an example? Yes, I think coaching is a good example. If you're working, it's kind of like teaching. Coaching is instructing people on how to do things. It's communicating ideas. It's encouraging people. It's motivating people. So I think coaching can be a great example. It's also possibly working with your target age group. So that's another good reason why you might want to use that. So it looks like you guys were answering each other too.
Will this be available other than right now? Like, will it be available in the future to review it, or?
This PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, actually, so it's recording right now, and we're going to just put it up on our YouTube, our CWU Career Services YouTube account. I may have Heather Jones send it out through certification also, just so that people can see it there.
Okay, thank you.
Not have to go to our YouTube, but yeah. Yeah, and like I said before, I'd really recommend going to that other website as well and attending the panel if you can too, because then you're going to hear some, all kinds of different interview questions. I mean, there's some schools that are just asking things that are a little bit strange. Even like last year, I did a mock interview night with like about 30 students, and we had some school districts come and do the mock interviews, and they submitted their own questions. And one district asked, say a student gives you an apple, what do you do? And so he then later explained what, kind of what he was trying to get out of that. It's like they're just trying to gain insight into who you are and what kind of a teacher you might be. And so this person was actually looking for multiple responses. Like he had several that he thought would be considered good answers. But some of them are asking some very different things that you wouldn't quite expect. But then there's also the very across the board ones that everybody seems to be asking, and so those are the ones I tried to go over today. But really knowing your area too is important, and trying to predict what they might ask for your area of teaching.
Going off the letter of intent, what's like a good time frame to respond?
That's a good question. I have heard, you don't want to let it go on too long. I would say, a week would probably be good. Ask them if you can have a week to think about it. I would say no more than 2 though, because, they're really trying to get their ducks in a row. And so a lot of times they're attending several career fairs, back to back, or, having different recruiting events back to back. And they're really busy and they're trying to, get all their people in place. And so, it could kind of mess them up in terms of like, if they think you're going to be the best fit and then they meet another person that would be a good fit, so don't leave them hanging too long. But definitely know the districts that you'd say no to also, that's always good information to have too, like going into a fair and, if somebody's wanting to interview you and you're like, nah, I just don't think that school would be a good place for me, knowing that going in is really helpful.
Is there normally like a lot of on-the-spot interviews during the ed fair? Or
Yes. They're shorter. They're shorter interviews. They're kind of like mini interviews, but yeah, they're definitely, what they're going to do is they're going to pull people aside. So they'll have their tables set up in the ballroom, like, table by table by table, and they're all next to each other. And so usually what they'll do is they'll have several people there from a district, like Quincy, for example. I know that they've signed up for five slots, so they're bringing five people. And so they've got some people that'll sit there just at the table. They'll have other people that will pull people aside, and they'll usually pull them outside the ballroom so that they're not asking you questions in front of the other districts. But yeah, they're going to be like mini interviews. That's going to be the first part of the screening process, really. So it'll be probably more general questions at first, and then from there they'll decide, do they want to talk to you again or not. So let's see, it says, another question, would you always stay away from giving your age in your description? For example, I'm 26. I feel like this can be used as a strength of mine, meaning more experience and separation from high school student age. Yeah, I mean, that could be fine. It's just usually, like I say, we're trying to get people to not ever create the habit of telling their age, because like I say, a lot of times it can be used against you in a way. It could make them feel like if they perceive you to be too young or too green, then that maybe isn't a good thing. And definitely as you get older, it's not necessarily a good thing. So we just like to keep them guessing. Any other questions?
What do you think like you need to bring to the ed fair? Like just a resume, or like for exit assessment we're doing a portfolio, or just everything? what they want?
I would keep it pretty simple just because otherwise you're going to get really bogged down at the fair. It's kind of chaotic in a way. So probably what I would do is just bring a pad folio if you have one, or a nice folder to keep all your resume straight. And I would bring lots of copies of your resume. And if you can print them on resume paper, even better. And if you have districts that you really are excited about, you could tailor the resume a little bit to them, like put their name in the objective statement. So say, the objective statement would say, to obtain a 3rd through 5th grade teaching position with Lake Washington School District. And then if it's got their name in it, that makes them feel good, like you personalized it for them. And then that makes them feel excited. You just have to make sure you give the right resume to the right school district and you don't mess it up.
Yeah.
But don't bring other things, like you really don't need to bring other things. Just dress nice, look polished. And then that's it. They'll have business cards and things that they'll be giving you. So, you don't want to be too bogged down. I would not bring the portfolio personally, just because, like I say, you might get just bogged down. I would bring that to the next interview, because you're going to probably have at least 3 interviews for each district, I would say 2 to 3. So like one would be the ed fair, and that'll be a quick, just the initial screening process. Then you may get called to have an interview with a panel. Then the next one could be with the principal. Sometimes it's more of where they actually want a teaching sample. So they may actually have you put on like a mini lesson. They may have you do an impromptu thing, like give us an example of how you would lay out a 30 to 90 minute lesson on blah, blah, blah. So it's good to, that's why we tell you to ask, what's the next step in the process, so that you know what your next interview might look like and how to be prepared for that. But yeah, you can bring your portfolio to more of like the in-house sit-down interview, not the just pull you aside interview at the ed fair. This question says, do they give interviews to people that haven't student taught but plan on student teaching in their district? I would think so. A lot of times they want, if they are interested in hiring you, they want you to actually do your student teaching in their district. So like that's a good match. And if you haven't student taught, yeah, they're definitely still interviewing people, because they need teachers so badly, and they know you're going to do your student teaching, soon anyways. How long does a general interview last? Not at the ed fair. I would say at least a half an hour. I'll be prepared for a half an hour to an hour. Although I've heard of some places doing longer interviews where they actually give you a tour of the school and everything. So you want to try to find that information out too. Like if they, usually they'll tell you all of that, but if they don't, make sure to ask. I know for interviews at Central, for working as like a staff or faculty member at Central, they'll actually have you come for the whole day. That's not really typical for other school districts like that are not in higher ed. But you could have something that's a bit longer where it's not the formal interview. I mean, part of it's the formal interview, like a half hour to an hour, and then another part of it is like I say, having a tour of the school. But just consider yourself to be on that whole time and be professional that whole time. Says, who is the guy coming that is representing Lake Washington High School? So it's Lake Washington School District, that person that's coming, and they actually are at the John Muir Elementary. So that is Jeff I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Degaye, Jeff, Degalllier. And if I have an interview set up already with the district at 12 p.m., would I go directly to them when the career fair starts? Yes. So if they have told you that they want to interview you at the fair starts at 12. I would just show up a little bit early and just be waiting there at the entrance. We won't let any students in until 12 though. So you'll be waiting outside the ballroom doors, and then at 12 we'll let everybody in, and it's possible that they would come out and maybe meet you beforehand or come check to see if you're there beforehand. So just in case, that's why I say get there a little bit early, just in case. Have I answered all the questions on the side here? Let me know if I haven't. Looks like somebody had asked before. I assume that a real world application like coaching is a better example than an in-class controlled forced one. So yeah, real world examples are definitely going to be better than classroom examples. The only time I would say to pull from a classroom example is if that's the only experience that you have. And then you've got to say something. So if you want to, say something along the lines of, I don't have actual hands-on experience with that in the real world, but in our class or such and such class, we had to do this, and then just tell them all about the thing that you did and just go step by step, because they're just trying to gain insight into your brain and how it works. So that's a lot of what the sort of situational questions are trying to do. They're trying to see, like, what is your thought process? Okay, what sort of dress code would you suggest for the ed fair? Professional dress, or dress for an interview, suit, etc.? Yeah, so I mean, we love when people wear suits and dress up really nice for the ed fair, because it represents our school. I mean, you're representing the whole institution for a crowd. Like, yes, our students look good. But that being said, you don't have to, there's some range there. Definitely, we recommend dress up more than business casual. Some people think, oh, business casual is fine for a career fair. We think you should dress up a little bit nicer than that. So, slacks, a skirt, but a longer skirt is good. Blazers are great. You don't have to wear a tie necessarily, but ties are nice. Definitely a blazer can really dress things up though. And shoes are important too. You want to have professional looking shoes, not tennis shoes or sandals or stilettos. Stilettos are a no-no. Actually, you want to, like I said before, err on the side of conservative. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, you guys have my contact info if you want to email me. And like I said, if you need an appointment as well, you can call that number that I had shown before, or just go to our website and you can find the info on how to get a hold of us. If you still haven't had your resume looked at by somebody, you're going to want to have that done too. So help applying to a job, we can do that. We can do a mock interview. If you got letters of intent that you needed help deciding about, we can help with that. So we have drop-in times as well as you can make an appointment. So to make an appointment, call that number or go to our website and find the number if you didn't get it. If you wanted to just come see me during my drop-in hours, I have drop-in hours every Friday in Black Hall, and that's in Black 231. And it's from 9 to 12 and 1 to 4. So pretty much all day I'm there, and you could come pop in and see me on a Friday if you needed some help or have any questions. All right, well, thanks so much, you guys. Thanks for being a good audience, and thanks for all your questions, and thanks for showing up. Have a good evening.